That's good. If Ricky makes 20, we may want to get started.
All righty, I've started the recording, so it's all yours.
Okay, we're great. Thanks. So I want to welcome everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Scott Showalter. I'm the director of the Master's Accounting program here. I followed Kathy, which is also in line with us today. You probably know one of the two of us if you're alum with the program. Thank you for joining our inaugural event of the Jenkins program, Lifelong Learning. When we were putting this together, there was two driving forces that drove us to put this together. One is, as you know, and we told you when you were at the program, you've joined a profession that requires you to continually invest in yourself. And so therefore, the mandate for lifelong learning is very strong. And you need to invest in yourself as you go forward. Your firms invest in you, but you also have the need to invest in yourself. The other one, as we know, is because you are a MAC alum or a friend of a MAC alum, you have a desire to connect with your fellow alumni. And so we're putting those together in what we're calling the Jenkins MAC program, Lifelong Learning. And so thank you for coming in this. This is an inaugural event, and we very much appreciate you going on the ride with us. Okay, so we're kicking this off, and we want to emphasize this is the beginning of the journey. We will continue to add events as we go forward, but for this summer is kind of our pilot program as we're talking about it. We're gonna start off with the series of 3 summer sessions. Most of you have signed up for those, followed by a fall session. Here's the calendar that I have in front of you. And today, if you see the topics up here, we put them in 2 groups. One is what's going on that I really, really need to know about. And I cannot imagine the first topic being any more relevant than it is today. And that is disruption. You look around everywhere. So we thought about what's going on that you want to know about that can impact you personally or the job that you're with. But we also wanted to give you topics that you invest in yourself, skills. And so you'll see the second one on June 17th, it's design thinking. If you don't know what design thinking is, I encourage you to look that up before then. We'll probably send you some information to help you understand it. But with that one, you're investing in yourself, a way of thinking that will make you more effective in what you're doing. So we're building a combination of both current events with both the first and the third, the last one being sustainability, if you think about everything that's happening there in corporate reporting and that area. So sort of bookkeeping or ending 2 current events followed by some current skills. And the last thing you'll see up here is the fact in September, we're going to ask you to come together. This is in addition to the summer series, in which we're going to spend a good part of a day sharing information with you, having alums share information. So if you have anything particularly that you'd like to share with your alum, particular skill or knowledge that you want to share, please contact myself or Jessica Moran on that. And so we are putting that program together. So as it says, it's a summit in which we're going to be sharing information. Going forward, this isn't the only thing we'll be doing, but this is what we're starting with now. And we are very much open to any suggestions as you go forward. One of the things we know that you desire is CPE. And so this is an and, not an or. And so the activities we're doing this summer particularly will be CPE eligible. And you probably understand the drill many times, but you need to remain logged in for the 50 minutes. You need to respond to at least 3 polling questions. And you know Dr. Beasley, so you know you have more than 3 polling questions to be able to respond to on that. So feel free to that. At the end, you're going to get a survey. You need to complete the survey to be eligible for CPE. It's very important to us, being that this is an inaugural event, that you actually do give us feedback. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you like to see different. You have a chance to shape what this looks for. Please don't miss that opportunity and provide us some opportunity to do that. If you are having problems with your polling questions and the answers, for some reason it won't work, just drop it in the chat and we will pick that up as well with that. So at this point, I'm actually going to get out of the way because you didn't come to listen to me. You actually came to listen to Mark Beasley. You know, you introduce people and you say they don't need any introduction. That's really true in this case. I do not need to introduce Mark to you. He's a KPMG professor of accounting. He's also the director of the Enterprise Risk Initiative. If you think about what he does, he has unparalleled, and I don't use that word easily, unparalleled expertise and helping businesses and organizations integrate risk into the strategy and governance. Mark does that every day, is world renowned for that. So I will just refer to him as Mr. Enterprise Risk Management. And with that, Mark, I'll turn the stage over to you.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to see so many of you familiar faces on the call today. We appreciate your being a part of this. You know, Scott, thank you for the introduction. As my kids will say, I am the risk guy, which means I'm the guy that typically told them, no, you can't do that. So hopefully we'll talk about it more of, no, you can do that, but you just want to do it intelligently. So it's a pleasure to be a part of this sort of but the real inaugural event. And kudos to Scott and Jessica for making this happen. And thank you for being a part of this. So as Scott mentioned, the topic today is just looking at how can we be better prepared so that we're able to manage through the reality of disruption, which gets into the concept of enhancing our agility and nimbleness. And you'll hear me today talking a lot about resilience. So just to get us sort of thinking, I'm going to launch a polling question, and you'll see it on your screen, I hope. And the question here is, to what extent has your world been interrupted and disrupted over the past 2.5 years? So just give us a sense for what it has felt like to you. It's a perception, obviously, but what is the reality of what it has felt like to you over the last couple of years? And, you know, I sort of know what I'm anticipating is going to be the response here, and I'll go ahead and share it real fast. And to no surprise, 90% are saying mostly too extensively, that we've had a real bumpy ride since particularly March of 2020, and that is continuing. And so I think the lesson here is this wild ride that we've been experiencing up through now is continuing on and will likely be a reality that we're going to be dealing with going forward. But when you think about just the last 2 years, COVID, when you really focus on the pandemic, we had a single root cause event called COVID-19 that was one event that had an explosive disruptive impact across all aspects of most every organization out there. There's not many that have been immune to the events of 2020. And it disrupted how we deliver products and services. It obviously affected our talent, supply chain challenges out the wazoo, and just the economic uncertainty, particularly in the early days of that. And then the demand it's put on technology just to be able to connect remotely. And that one event was massively disruptive and continues to be. But we've also not just had COVID in the last 2 years. We've had a tremendous amount of social unrest. Unfortunately, now we're dealing with the war in Ukraine. We've got rising interest rates because of potential inflation issues. We've got the Great Resignation, nervous markets that we're seeing, unfortunately, a lot right now. And then climate issues tied to wildfires, for example, and the list goes on. And I think the lesson that as we slow down and realize COVID was complicated, but then when you throw all these also very complicated issues, the reality is disruption is all over the place. And a lesson I think we need to all take away from the last couple of years is black swans do exist. That is, what we think is a low probability event, oh, that's not going to happen to me. The answer is, well, it might. And ignoring it by only thinking about probability, thinking, well, it's a very low probability, Mark, I'm not going to waste my time on that. Not thinking through, but what if? If it did, it could be catastrophic. And so thinking about these potential black swan events, particularly those that could have that catastrophic impact, it only makes good sense for us, both on the personal level and then in a professional capacity, to really pause and think through what could emerge and disrupt how we do business and how we live our lives. When you look at just all these drivers, and this is a slide we use a ton with our executive that we do in the ERM space, we try to highlight that the reality is this driving these events rather the level of uncertainty we're having to navigate as we run businesses and make important strategic decisions, we're facing a number of significant issues that are complex in and of themselves. Just look at cyber threats and terrorism, ransomware as an example, shifts in customer demographics, obviously just big data and the challenges with that. None of these are simple issues. And we're gonna have to, we can't eliminate the reality of this uncertainty, but pausing to think through how they could impact us could be in our best interest. And that I'm going to come in every day, hopefully trying to do the right thing of delivering mission critical services, the deliverables that I'm in charge of, whether it's teaching classes, doing research, or selling a product or services. And I'm trying to do that to achieve our strategic goals. But if I'm not paying attention to and really thinking through the reality of uncertainties and how that can trigger a number of drivers of disruption, I'm going to face more and more missed opportunities. All the good work I'm doing is going to be derailed by things that disrupt what I'm trying to accomplish. And so I'm not achieving the strategic goals that I intend to achieve, but rather I'm diverted and I miss the mark, or I'm having to spend a lot of resources to get it back on track because I didn't anticipate and plan for disruption. What I want to tease up and get us just embracing, and I think we all get it, that disruption is a reality. It's not going to go away. Disruption is just a fact of life. We're disrupted every day in our lives. We run into traffic. There's a line at Starbucks, which could drive me crazy. There are, interruptions in your office, but are good interruptions, but it's just a reality. Things are going to disrupt what we're doing. The question is, to what extent am I preparing for that level of disruption? Which gets me then to another quick poll. Let me pause and launch our second poll, which is now I want to get your hat thinking about, put on your hat of your organization. And if you were to evaluate how you think your organization is doing to prepare to navigate continued disruption, how prepared do you think they are? What is your level of confidence that we're really prepared to the level we need to be to deal with the reality of the disruption that is going to be out there? And I'll give you another second. It looks like most everybody's participating with thank you very much. Let me share the results. And we see a real mix here. Some are saying minimally to somewhat. So 55% are in the minimal to somewhat. And then another 45% are saying, well, I think we're pretty prepared. I think we're doing a pretty good job. So we see a mixed range on that. Well, let me walk you through what we have pulled from some of the work that we've done as we have surveyed executives about their state of risk management processes in their organization. And this is coming from a study that we do in partnership every year with the AICPA, where we're surveying the C-suite executives on how they evaluate and think about risk on the horizon for their organization. And so this, as you see here, 83% reveal that they have had, their organization has had to deal with a significant operational surprise in the last 5 years, and in a mostly to extensive capacity. So if you think about a 1 to 5 scale, they're picking 4 and 5 saying, yeah, we've had pretty significant operational surprises in the last 5 years that have derailed what we're trying to do. But when we go and say, okay, to what extent are you trying to prepare for that? 28% of those same people describe their process for navigating risk and the pending reality of that as mature or robust. So we sort of leave that with, is that an opportunity to improve? Could we do something? Could they do something to narrow this gap? 83% are saying we've had pretty significant operational disruptions, but only 28% of us think we're really prepared in a robust way to deal with that. I see that as an opportunity. Opportunity to be and enhance what we're doing to be more resilient. And when I think about resilience, the term here defined is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. It's not to say the capacity to never face a difficulty. It's the capacity to navigate a difficulty when they emerge. And another sort of element of that definition is just toughness. Or do we have the capacity to quickly recover? That's that nimbleness and agility that we're seeking. And are we really at a position where we can recover in a way that is resilient to the organization? Let me get us to watch this is a short video clip, and I'll give credit to Deloitte. This to me was, it was helpful to just get me thinking about the concept of resilience. So I'm going to play this quick clip and then we'll move from there.
Our world is full of disruption, but it is also full of resilience. From the immortal jellyfish that can be endlessly reborn, to the mighty oak that can live for hundreds of years, resilience is all around us.
Oh, my bad, sorry. I hit a button.
Our world is full of disruption, but it is also full of resilience. From the immortal jellyfish that can be endlessly reborn, to the mighty oak that can live for hundreds of years, resilience is all around us. The past year has taught businesses some hard lessons about disruption and perseverance, with the most successful organizations displaying attributes embodied by our resilient world. Preparedness is one such attribute. 2020 has shown that strategy and preparation are crucial to coping with unexpected disruption. CXOs must assess every situation, thinking several moves ahead, taking the risks required to win. Then there's adaptability, an obvious resilience trait, but perhaps the most difficult to achieve. Resilient organizations must be fluid, able to move in new directions, and instantly adapt to any circumstance. Third is collaboration, essential in today's environment and beyond. To succeed, we need to recognize the power and potential of working together, using our individual strengths to complement one another, creating solutions we couldn't devise on our own. Then comes trust. It's built in normal times, but tested in hard times. Business leaders must constantly show commitment and credibility, so others instinctively know they'll be there when needed most. Finally, there's responsibility. To make our world a better place, leaders must serve others selflessly while protecting their own organizations. These 5 traits are what every business needs to be truly resilient, to form the strongest of foundations, enabling it to weather any storm.
So this video, is just teeing up, I think, the importance of resilience. And I'll hit on the first and the fifth concepts particularly, where they talk about part of being resilient is preparing. The second part is, the fifth part on their list is responsibility. When I teach the overview of ERM class, day 1, we talk about the importance of risk management skills and competencies, because we are finding that business leaders, regardless of whether they're in the risk management function or not, whatever function they play, they're going to be responsible for managing risk. It's now becoming an expected core competency. Anticipating things and preparing for things that could be disruptive is now expected of anybody aspiring to be in a leadership role. And so I think when you think about what Deloitte's short video there is just talking about the importance of preparing, but then accepting that responsibility, I think enhances our capabilities of being business leaders and to deal with the disruption that we're facing, that we're going to face, that is going to continue as we move into the future. When you think about then building this resiliency and preparing to be more resilient, we always like to say it starts with the strategy. Those of you that had me in the ERM class may have heard me, might remember I have said, if you're ever taking an exam and you don't know the answer to the question, just put, it's all about the strategy, Mark, ERM and the strategy. But because it is, we want to think about being resilient because it strategically makes good sense. But for us to then think about, well, what do we need to be resilient? Why are we trying to be resilient? Well, we need to then have a strategic lens of what is it that we need to pay attention to and protect. So we always start with, before I want to ever think about what I need to be doing to prepare for resilience, I need to think about what I need to protect. And we always like to think about, well, let's keep the end game in mind. So look at the right-hand side of your screen. The end game in mind is to increase strategic value. That's sort of broadly defined. If I'm a publicly traded company, that might be gross shareholder value. If I'm a nonprofit organization, it may be enhance the ability to deliver our mission to key stakeholders. If I'm the university, it's going to be, build our reputation and brand as an institution of higher learning. Whatever it is, that's my goal. But the blue in the center represent what I'm doing to achieve the goal. And these are just hypothetical examples. I may have unique products and services. Hopefully I have a great supply chain that's very sophisticated, gives me competitive advantage, and we have great leaders. We have great access to finances and capital to fund things that we want to do, and we're really good with technology capabilities. Where we start with building resilience is saying, do you know what your organization's crown jewels are? Because you want to focus on what are the crown jewels that drive value. That is what I want to center my thinking on resiliency to focus in on. So it starts with understanding that strategic view and what it is that drives value that I want to protect so that I am tough in being able to continue delivering unique products and services or that sophisticated supply chain when disruption occurs. What I'd like to do now is sort of say, let's take a look at then, once I have that strategic sort of lens in play, what could be sources of potential disruptors that I can use to prepare for being more nimble and agile, building our resilience. So on the screen here, you'll see 5. There are more than 5. I just picked 5 sources of potential disruption. The first one is what must go right for us to have that unique product or service doesn't. What we had to have happen failed. That is going to disrupt our ability to continue driving value. The second potential disruptor is we have to make assumptions about the future because none of us has a crystal ball. We have to make an assumption. The problem is the assumption is flawed. The third potential disruption could be blind spots. We all have them. Now I'm stepping out of my area of knowledge into a medical field, but from what I understand and read, we as human beings, our eyeballs, we have blind spots. There is a spot in our vision that we do not see, a dark spot. Well, we also have them in our decision making. And we have these blind spots that can lead to ineffective decisions that could be disruptive. I'll talk a minute about gray rhinos when we get to that. The fourth disruptor is emerging innovation and technology. It, we know, can be disruptive. And then finally, ignoring the need for a watch list, not keeping my eye on and thinking through the downstream potential effects of emerging events as they occur. And I'm going to touch on all 5 of these, but I'm going to come at each of the 5 with, okay, Mark, I get that's a disruptor. What can I do? So I'm going to lay out 5 action steps that can be the more proactive way that we can then manage these disruptors or prepare for them, maybe is a better way to say it. Going back to the Deloitte sort of message of preparedness is a key to success in building resilience. So let's walk through each of these 5. So action step number 1, again, centers on starting with that strategic view. I got to make sure I know what's really important for my success. And then I begin asking the question, what must go right for that success to continue? Who are the key people that are involved in the process that I need to make sure we don't lose? That could be talent. It could be a customer. It could be a supplier. Key people. Processes. What must happen in the flow of things to really continue, particularly if you think about the sophisticated supply chain. We've seen a lot of disruption in the supply chain process. And then technology. How could that affect what we're trying to do? So action step number 1 is first just pinpointing what must go right. That might mean thinking through, how does the process start? Who's involved along the way? What must happen flawlessly? what can I not afford to work? What are the key systems and people that need to make it work? And then particularly paying attention to where are the thin layers? Where do I have weak points that could create choke points along the way? So when I think about what must go right, asking these kinds of questions and really understanding for my unique product and service, what must go right? By asking that and understanding these key elements about what must go right, then the preparedness is what might emerge that suddenly prevents what must go right. So I'm now going to flip the question to say, what internally within my operations could emerge that prevents what must go right, but also what outside the entity externally could occur that could prevent what must go right. Let me bring this home in that I'm sort of presenting this more from a corporate or organizational lens, but the same thinking should apply to thinking about disruption in our own personal objectives and goals. So let's move to a simple personal example. Let's say, which this is a true statement, I have an objective to own a beach house in 5 years that I can enjoy for decades. That's that end goal. That's that increased strategic value box. I have a goal and objective to own a beach house in 5 years that I can enjoy for decades. Assessing what must go right, I need to think about things like, well, I got to save some more money to be able to afford it. I've got to stay employed to keep saving the money for a period of time. I can't just go do it right now. I also need to maintain my health. If I don't pay attention to my health, I'm not going to enjoy the house. I've got to find beach property I can afford that's available. I've also got to, in 5 years, still like the beach. I may discover, ooh, I like the mountains better. So that's going to change my objective. So that's got to stay sticking, as well as being able to maintain the property once I purchase it so I can enjoy it for decades. All these things must go right. Things can emerge that are going to impact what must go right. So what am I doing to prepare for those things that must go right to achieve my objective? So again, what I'm talking about today has a corporate application. It also has a personal application. Let's move to action step number 2. Action step number 2 is kick the tires of key assumptions that we're having to make. Kick the tires of key assumptions that we're having to make. We're having to make assumptions about the future because we don't have that crystal ball. The key is, am I naming the assumption and recognizing it as an assumption? The illustration that we've used, and it's a little bit dated, but people still say, yeah, I get it, what you're saying, really comes back to 2008 and 2009. When you think about what was happening in the bigger banking world, the investment banking world, a lot of bank models, financial services entities were building their models off of products that relied on housing prices staying stable or increasing. The model was based on the fact that they felt like that things would stay stable or increase over time. What the model wasn't built off of is, well, what if we have a sudden drop in housing? What happened in a lot of cases is clearly that was an assumption, but it was almost treated as a fact. But it wasn't a fact. In fact, it was a big, bad assumption that had a catastrophic impact on the economy. So when you think about assumptions, the key is, am I treating the assumption as an assumption or am I treating it as a fact? And I want to make sure I keep it in the assumption category and start asking questions like, first, what are the big ones we're having to make about our success? What are we having to assume about our ability to continue our success? Second question is, well, what's the basis for that assumption? And then third, how do we know it's a good one from the start? It's not flawed already, or paying attention to changing conditions that maybe the assumption was valid initially, but the world has shifted, now making that assumption no longer as strong or even valid as we go ahead. So when I think about action steps to prepare for assumptions, one of the things I just want to think about is, do I know where I'm making big assumptions? I at least want to know what they are and then keep my eye on them and then really kick the tires. Are they valid from the start, or maybe they're valid, but they're changing on me? So if you come back to, again, my strategic lens, what are we assuming about our access to healthy capital? What are we assuming about strong leadership? Maybe we are assuming our leaders are here to stay, when we really realize, no, they're not. They're very vulnerable for departure, and we're likely not going to be able to compete to retain them. So are we really assuming, making a valid assumption about that strong leadership having sticking power for the long term? So recognizing those assumptions and naming them and realizing we're vulnerable if the assumption changes, then we are now beginning to prepare for what do we need to do about that assumption? How do we prepare for that? So back to my beach analogy, an assumption I could be making is, yeah, I know hurricanes are out there, but I don't think they're going to have a real long-term effect on my ability to enjoy. I think we're going to be fine, might have a few storms. I'm just going to assume we're going to be fine. That's an assumption I'm making. I just need to recognize it's an assumption. I have no knowledge of the frequency of hurricanes really hitting my property. I don't know that. It's an assumption that I'm making. If I'm concluding, I think I'll be okay. I think I can make it through. The third sort of action item is the blind spots. Blind spots. Thinking about where might I have a blind spot that could lead to a sudden, not expected disruption. And this is where, again, I said earlier, we all are subject to having our own blind spots. Just the hidden biases that we as humans have and are subject to can impact how we make decisions. You see on the right there some examples of bias that can trigger and affect decision making. Confirmation bias. We see that going on and on a lot now, where people like to embrace information that confirms what they already think. We see that happening with certain people only watching certain networks to get their news, or reading certain sources because it confirms what they think, and they're not looking at disconfirming information, or not willing to embrace it. We see in spades overconfidence in most leaders, and that's why they make it to leadership positions, but sometimes that overconfidence can be a little bit over the top, or maybe potentially a blind spot for us that could lead to decisions that could have a disruptive impact if we're not paying attention to that. And so normal human bias is going to kick in, and it does guide our behavior. And if we don't slow down and sort of focus in on them and look for ways to counter these biases, we may see blind spots entering into our world. I like to, think about, blind spots. We're all familiar with the concept of driving a car. We know that on the right side of our shoulder and the left side of our shoulder, there are blind spots if we're not paying attention. When you drive, hopefully you compensate for the blind spot by recognizing, yeah, I'm subject to a blind spot in my back right or my back left, but I'm going to look at my two side mirrors, my rear view mirror, and I might even turn my head. I'm taking action because I know it's a potential risk for me that could create a blind spot. So I'm going to do things proactively to try to lower the exposure versus just merging into the lane without even looking at my mirrors. Well, the same is true with decision making. Pulling together and getting us to think about the confirmation bias as an example. Can we empower someone to play the devil's advocate role, where we ask someone to actually play the role of coming in with disconfirming information that actually gets us thinking about the opposite, just to see what's the impact if the 180-degree opposite occurs. How might that be if our information is not valid? It just allows us to be anticipating some of the blind spots, because I've actually tried to counter by looking over to my right and my left, seeking disconfirming kinds of information. There's a great book out there called The Gray Rhino by Michelle Wucker, who defines this concept of gray rhino as a high probability, high impact event. Basically, things that are big and bad staring us in the face, but we don't see it or pay attention to it, but we ought to. The example that she gives in teeing up the theme of her book is, look at how many people ignore the importance of preparing a will. The big, gray rhino is death is in the future. It's not to be morbid today, but the idea is it's a reality staring us in the face, but refusing to even think about it and take actions to prepare for this looming rhino means we're going to really be flattened if we don't really embrace it and take advantage of it. You'll see down on the bottom right, it's the TED Talk. It's a 14-minute TED Talk. You might find it interesting if you haven't seen or heard reference to her book. This will give you sort of the gist of, and you'll see some other talks that she's given if you just want to get a quick clip on the concept of a gray rhino. We're used to the elephant in the room or black swans. Well, she's introducing this gray rhino concept being the big thing right in front of us that we just somehow cannot see. And we're eventually going to be potentially flattened by it if we continue to ignore it. Well, back to my beach personal application of thinking about a gray rhino is, if I go back to my beach sort of hypothetical here is, maybe the reality, the gray rhino that I'm facing is my actual savings rate of putting cash in the bank on a monthly basis. I'm in denial in that I'm not putting in what my budget says I have to do to get to my 5-year goal. I'm not saving it. So the reality is, Mark, face reality, you're not putting enough money aside. You need to be putting X aside, but you're putting Y aside. That's sort of the gray rhino idea. That is, in 5 years, I'm going to be disrupted in my goal because I didn't prepare. I just didn't really own up to the reality that was looming right in front of me. So this is this gray rhino kind of concept. And I will give credit to Michelle Walker for giving you a little more thought-provoking things on that. I'll get Jessica, if you don't mind, we'll launch another polling question here real fast to sort of get you now thinking about your organization. And here's the question that I'd like you to give us your perspective on. To what extent does your organization's culture tolerate colleagues who raise opposing views or play that devil's advocate role? Do people tolerate that, embrace it, or do they like, oh no, Mark is beating that drum again and they really don't want to hear it. So it's one to think about. And, I guess there's some encouraging news that, close to 50% of you are saying, I think we're in a pretty good place. That's good. But then we have another 48% roughly saying, not really. Minimally to somewhat in a place that would tolerate that. So it's this concept of being willing to deal with some of these blind spots that we talked about and the potential of assumptions being flawed, being a key element of our culture. That is something to think through. We also do some survey work with Productivity every year. And one of the questions we ask, we're trying to get perspectives on top risk on the horizon for executives as they think about next year and 10 years out. And very much, except for the last year with the pandemic issues sort of pushed a few things out of the top 10 list. But up until the pandemic risk, one of the top 10 risks was a fear that my organization's culture did not encourage the escalation of important issues that need to be escalated, particularly about risk on the horizon for our organization. And so it's something to think through. Is my culture really embracing this willingness to talk about the potential for disruption and things that could emerge that maybe are the less fun things to think about because they're not talking about how successful we're going to be in a product launch, but it's going to be about, well, why we got some issues that we could be disruptive. It's just a cultural thing to think about. So now I'll go back to my fourth sort of action point, and this is to think about what I can do as a fourth action, and that is don't become a part of this club. We don't want our organizations to be a part of the club that we've seen Kodak and Circuit City and Blockbuster go. We know that Kodak was displaced by the iPhone and the ability to take digital photos. So the film-based industry really was interrupted significantly and disrupted by emerging technology coming from the phones, as an example. We know Circuit City and Amazon, just that emerging way of doing business, that innovation coming from Amazon, and then Netflix, although Netflix is now having its own issues, but it definitely knocked the Blockbuster kind of world and disrupted that significantly. And so action step number 4 is don't become a part of this reality. And the real action item is, well, how do I not do that? Well, maybe I want to pay more attention to emerging innovation and unexpected competitors. This is a screenshot from the study I mentioned with Protiviti, and this is the one that was released in December. In December, we were asking executives around the world, what are the risks on the horizon for 2022? And then we also said, well, what about 10 years out? What about 2031? And what I've got here are 2031 risks. And I think it's pretty interesting. This is from about 1,500 C-suite and board members from around the world, multi-industry. What we're seeing in the top 10 list for 2031 are concerns, number one concern, that they don't have the skill set in their organization to really manage the digital technologies that they're going to need 10 years out, that they feel like they're going to be left behind because they don't have the skill set and the ability to upskill people. They're also worried about the rapid speed of disruptive innovation. It's happening faster than they can keep up. They're worried about new products and services all of a sudden substituting. So think about the iPhone, the Amazons, the Netflix. They're worried about the equivalent happening to them. And they're worried about the new competitors or other industry changes, and particularly competitors that could emerge from outside my industry that could affect. But it's also interesting, number 8, resistance to change, not willing to move off status quo. So when you think about what could be disruptive, we see executives, 1,500 of them saying, I have an overarching concern about emerging innovation. I think when you look at the 4 I've highlighted, plus then number 8, 5 of 10 have an innovation, emerging sort of developments as a concern, that it could disrupt the crown jewels of their business. And so I think our action item here is to pay attention to emerging innovation, pay attention proactively to what's happening, and be thinking through how might it disrupt what we do. So back to my beach analogy, we've now embraced a lot of on-demand pre-recorded classes here at NC State. Could all that good work be becoming a substitute for Mark going into a classroom? Could it now be where it leads me to my beach analogy of suddenly NC State has a big layoff of faculty because we don't need them. We've got the ability to do this robotically. Well, obviously that's going to affect my beach enjoyment. It's going to affect my employment. It could be a substitute. It's an innovation. Now, I'd like to think, particularly at my age, this is not going to be a real big issue, but I don't need to ignore it. It may not displace me in a layoff, but it could affect my day-to-day. So I need to pay attention to it and embrace it and run with it and not ignore it. So action item number 4 is just embracing innovation, paying attention to it, looking for how technologies are emerging that could be disruptive. The last is, and tied to number 4, but my 5th action step is to look up and out more. In our ERM work that we do, and we work with a ton of organizations at their board level, we do it, many of you, some of you have been on practicum teams with us, but when we work with organizations, we observe that in a lot of cases, when you get them to think about what risk could emerge and be disruptive to them, they tend to go to what they know. You'll hear people say, well, how did you start? When we ask, well, what did you do to start identifying risk? The common response that we hear is, we started with the question by interviewing people, what keeps you up at night? That's a very common technique. What keeps you up at night? And we tell people, well, that's good. I'm glad you asked them that. That's a good start, but it's not a great start. Because if it's keeping them up at night, it's already on their list. They already know about it. When they know about something, they're probably doing something about it. Where value comes into play is, what is it that I'm not thinking about right now that I should be not sleeping at night about, but I don't even know to not sleep because I don't even know about it. Often we hear when they ask what keeps you up at night, what that does to people is it gets them thinking internally. I start thinking about our core operations. I think about things that we need to do to comply with a regulator. I think about internal people. I think internally because it's what I know. It's what I get my arms around. It's what I can see and touch. But when you look at a lot of the research out there, some studies by Booz Allen, there's some studies by EY, I've seen one by Deloitte, they all say the same thing. And the same thing is, what is likely to cause the greatest drop in market cap is an external driven issue, not an internal, something I already know about issue. Because the ones I know about, I'm managing probably. It's what I don't know. So we talk about, you got to look up and out more what's happening externally. Comes back to my slide on growing uncertainty. I need to pay attention to all these triggers of uncertainty, and this list will constantly be changing. And this is not a complete list, but it's the kind of idea that I need to be paying attention to what's happening out there and develop what I would call a watch list. We coach executives all the time on the cadence of an enterprise-wide risk process. And we talk about an annual process that's defined, it's repeatable, it's identifiable. That sort of says we have a structure. But we also say complement the cadence of a structure with nimbleness. Look at what your formal ERM process is generating as far as what concerns you have about risk on the horizon. But then just pay attention. What should I throw on the wall on a flip chart that's sort of a watch list? It didn't come through my ERM process, but it's something I'm like paying attention to. I want to develop that watch list. I want to pay attention to things and begin thinking through what could be the downstream effect. So I could be, an example here would be the unfortunate situation in the Ukraine, where the Ukraine is a catastrophic event going on in Eastern Europe right now. But a US only business that maybe is more southeast region of the country may say, yeah, that Ukrainian situation is terrible, it's terrible, but I don't think thankfully it's not hurting my business. Because on the surface, I don't really do business in Eastern Europe. I don't sell products over there. But what I may not be thinking through is the downstream effect of that war in Ukraine. Maybe my third-party provider is sitting here in the Southeast. But what I don't realize is my fourth layer of provider, the third-party provider to my third-party provider, is actually sourcing from Eastern Europe and potentially Ukraine. I'm not thinking through fourth and fifth layers of providers in my supply chain because I only focus on the third party that sits in Georgia, for example. Well, the state of Georgia, that is, not the country of Georgia. But the idea being, I want to pay attention to the watch list and just think through, let's just pay attention to it. Let's keep our eye on it. We don't necessarily have to do anything yet, but let me just keep my eye on it. I just want to not lose sight of it as we think about some of the issues that could emerge. So back to my beach. If I'm not paying attention, I might be missing a development happening out of Washington, where Congress maybe, hypothetically, removes beach homes from the protection and services of FEMA support. So back to my beach example, if I'm not paying attention to Washington and I go plowing down to the beach and buy the house thinking, well, if that hurricane that I'm assuming won't be a big deal actually becomes a big deal, well, at least there's FEMA. Well, maybe not. And I want to pay attention to that. As that debate starts happening, if I hear that rumbling, I want to be I want to be paying attention to that because that could detrimentally affect my objective being achieved. So when you think about what we talked about today, our goal here is going back to that Deloitte little video clip. We're really just wanting to be more resilient. I'd like to be more nimble. I'd like to be more agile. I want to prepare for that. well, what can I do? What are 5 things I could do to help prepare me a little better? And here are the 5 things. Look for the thin points in the process of what must happen and identify where that's really thin. I don't want the artery to burst. What is the thin point? Secondly, I want to name my assumptions, kick those tires, and make sure I've thought that assumption through, and I've thought through, well, what if we're wrong? What if it turns out to be the opposite? Identify your gray rhinos. What's staring you in the face that you just ignore? What's the issue you need to deal with that has got to be addressed that you just keep sort of saying and pretending it doesn't exist? Final, the 4th one rather is monitor innovation. Just keep your eye on what's happening and embrace it. I know it's hard, but we want to embrace it and we need to pay attention to it and look for opportunities to take advantage of it, and then creating that watch list. So it's, in essence, it's trying to move us from a reactive state to a proactive state. And that helps us be more nimble. Now, if any of this resonates, and you're like, wow, this would be good to have a conversation with some of my colleagues, here's a tool that I'm actually using with a board on Tuesday. Next Tuesday, I'm going to be leading a board conversation with an entity to really get them thinking and brainstorming to prepare for potential disruptors. So what am I going to do? I'm going to lay out the core drivers, the crown jewels for the organization. And then I'm going to assign a table and say, table 1, I want you to be thinking about what must go right and what could prevent it. Table 2, I want you to think about assumptions. Table 3, pay attention to the gray rhinos. What are our blind spots? Where do you think we have blinders that we need to reveal and open up? Table 4, how might innovation affect what we do? What's emerging out there that could be disruptive? And then table 5, based on everything you're seeing in the press and just paying attention to, what should be on our watch list? I'm going to get them to do this with a sticky. They're going to take little sticky notes and write down their top 3 answers to their assigned question at their table. Then they're going to take that up to a flip chart and they're going to put their stickies on a flip chart. So I'm going to have a flip chart for the what must go right group. I'm going to have a different flip chart for the assumptions group. And I'm going to get a bunch of sticky notes. And then I'm going to say, now start talking it through. See if you can arrive at some agreement on what you think of the top 5 on your list. Then we're going to debrief, because I'm hoping in that debrief, we're going to start seeing overlapping themes to the same, different questions, but probably similar answers, and start looking where we're going to start identifying potential sources of disruption that begin to overlap. And then that allows us to then be more proactively thinking about it as we get some consensus on where the greatest potential disruptors could emerge. You know, I had to bring it back to risk somehow, Scott. So the risk thing is that center point. If I don't pay attention to these disruptors, then we're going to have risks that continue to create missed opportunities. But as you look at this slide, if you can remember when I showed you the slide earlier today, the missed opportunities sort of flash symbols there were much bigger. In this slide, I've made them smaller. But notice I didn't eliminate them, because I'm not trying to say that we'll be able to predict everything that could disrupt and mean that we'll be perfectly achieving our goals. But the point here is, if I can lower the magnitude of a missed opportunity, I'm going to get to the achievement of strategic goals more often, because I'm going to be anticipating disruptions, which I'm going to call a risk, that I can manage the bad ones, the downside ones, but then I can see some risk I can take. So think about the innovation and technology. Maybe we could take that risk, and that can then lead us to that achievement of strategic goals. So let's end, Jessica, with one more poll. And this will just get us closing out for the session here. So this question is, to what extent do you think your organization may need to or could benefit from upping its game in regards to being more nimble and agile? So is there an opportunity here, as you think about your organization, for it to maybe think about this in a little more depth and a little more proactivity to really prepare for that? And so it looks like, Jessica, we can probably go ahead and close that poll. And I would see that a large majority of you say, yeah, we probably could spend more time. There'd be some advantage to thinking it through. So there's an opportunity here to take advantage of it. And hopefully some of this is giving you some food for thought of how you could maybe help provide some leadership and getting that conversation going. And if you just go back to my illustration of what I'm going to do next week, just borrow, steal, and take it and run with it. See if you can get a conversation going in your organization. So again, thank you for being here. When I think about, disruptions, I hope if I can prepare, this is where I'll be in a few years, sitting on the beach, enjoying one of those chairs with the house right behind me. So with that, I'm going to say thank you and stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Scott and Jessica to close this out. Scott, I think you're muted.
Jessica muted me. She could only do that in real life. She'd be happy about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so let me bring back. First of all, I want to thank Mark. I would go get Mark a coffee, but I think he's already had too much today. Okay.
That's a good point.
So we'll be fine on that. And if anybody was thinking of buying a beach house, Mark, they're now not thinking about buying the beach house. You've now given them enough reason not to be concerned about that. But hopefully everybody thought it was worth your time today, both from an organization perspective to help your organization, but also from a personal, because again, this is lifelong learning. This is about investing in yourself. Before I get off, I would like to remind you of CPE. Please complete your CPE and provide us any input on that. Also, we'd be very remiss if I didn't thank Jessica Moran. All this takes place because of the great effort of Jessica Moran that you have. Also would like to remind you for those who subscribe to the series, you have 2 more sessions available. Again, Friday, the 17th, same time, design thinking. And again, if you don't know what this is, you really need to come and participate in this. This is a real eye-opening event for you, and as well as sustainability on July 22nd. And please at least pencil in your calendar for September 9th. While it's not part of the summer series, it is something we're doing in the fall, and we think it'd be a great time to be able to get together on that.
Hey, Scott, can I endorse particularly the next one, the
Yeah.
June 17th?
Mm-hmm.
J. Mark Searcy did a session for us, and we had like 150 people on the call. Our chat box exploded in reaction of positive. They just thought he was so thought-provoking that I really encourage you to join in on that one, the next one, because he was fabulous.
Great. So with that, we want to thank you. I think, Jessica, you dropped some stuff in the chat on registration for that. And we hope everyone have a great day, and we'll just say go Hurricanes and leave it at that. Have a great day.